Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
The Senate's ongoing debate between the lawlessness that followed George Floyd's death and the circumstances that caused it continues. Key lawmakers express their views and a plea for financial aid for disability service providers impacted by the pandemic. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Last week, the Minnesota Senate began a series of hearings to investigate the rioting and demonstrations following the death of George Floyd.
What we're going to talk about during these hearings is what occurred in that period after Mr. Floyd was killed. And that, in terms of a timeline in my mind, is May 26th through June 10th. And during that period of time, there were riots, there was looting, there was destruction of private and public property, and I view those as being very, very serious criminal activity. Arson, for instance, is one of the most serious crimes that is on our books.
It's rightful that we have a discussion about what occurred and how government responded in these events. We all enjoy a right to be protected. It's in our law. I had constituents, many of them were mad, infuriated, and more importantly, fearful, as well as newscasters that were talking in live format on our televisions those nights. And the question kept coming up, where is the police? Where is the fire emergency personnel? Where was the government to protect life and property?
We are going to take this opportunity to spend many hours on end examining what happened in the aftermath of yet another killing of an unarmed black man, which was, I'll add, a slow, agonizing, and dehumanizing death. Why can't we spend that time trying to root out how to explain how that can happen?
The Constitution and the Bill of Rights of Minnesota says that security for the benefit and protection of the people. We can protect people in a lot of ways. Who protected George Floyd? We are here today because Mr. George Floyd died. My sympathies to his family. We all saw the video. It was horrific. The world is watching us. Senator Limmer also mentioned that we need to be here to listen, and I agree. I agree we need to listen to everyone, including our Senate members of color and Indigenous, but also those communities, people of color and Indigenous, who have been impacted by police brutality and by the disparities in this state.
This is my family, and the building was leveled the 29th, so the fire department fought the fire all night. I got there at about 6:30 in the morning, and they were still fighting it, so it looked like this at about 6:30 in the morning, and it was a shell. And then they ended up leveling it because it was unsafe, obviously. So this is a picture that was taken by friends of ours, and you know, it's hard for me to look at.
I would be concerned about a business owner that wasn't emotional about what's happened to all of you. We are all in this together, and you have every right. Your business is not just a part of you, it's a part of the community. And I would put it this way, I think all of you and those that stood up for you took a punch during that week, but I think you're going to get up from that punch, and I think you're going to live and fight on, and you're going to be successful, and we're all going to be proud of that. Staying with the metaphor of taking a punch, one of the things I hope this committee is going to do is try to look at why there was a fight. We have not yet heard testimony from the people, thousands of them that took to the street that were peaceful, and that's part of the story.
This week, I spoke with the chair of the Joint Committee, Senator Scott Newman.
You are chairing a series of joint meetings of the Transportation Committee and the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee to look into the lawlessness that followed the death of George Floyd while in police custody in Minneapolis on Memorial Day. What are some of the questions that you hope to have answered?
I think that from the Senate standpoint, what we want to know is essentially what happened and why. And there is a significant difference between protesting, civil disobedience, and arson, looting, that type of thing. Those are criminal activities. And this went on for a period of about a week with all of the looting, and public property was damaged, private property was damaged. And I think that from the Senate standpoint, I know bills are coming forward that we are going to have to address for such things as, public policy. There's probably going to be some bills coming forward in terms of fiscal issues to rebuild the city. And I think that the members of the Senate should have a very good understanding of what actually happened and what was done right and what was done wrong. And that really is the purpose of the hearing.
Now, several have asked, and I too am curious, why is the Transportation Committee a relevant committee to investigate these questions?
That's the easiest question you're going to ask me. The Judiciary Committee has jurisdiction over public safety. The Transportation has jurisdiction over Capitol security, over the highway patrol, and over the highway system. In the course of these riots, the state patrol, the highway patrol was pulled in, Capitol security was pulled in, and MnDOT was pulled in because of freeways being shut down. So for those reasons, both the Judiciary and the Transportation Committee have jurisdiction over components of what we are talking about.
So this is a chicken and egg question, because you've said the purpose of these meetings is not to consider police reforms following George Floyd's death, but rather to understand the civil unrest, the rioting, the looting, and the arson that followed. But without Floyd's death, captured on video and shared widely on social media, likely the spark that was the beginning of the civil unrest would not have happened. Like, you wouldn't have had one without the other. So can you really separate these issues?
The answer is absolutely. The two questions are completely separate and distinct issues. In the case of Mr. Floyd's death, that is an issue of police reform. What should the police have done differently? And quite frankly, what should the community do differently in terms of its interactions with the police? That's a completely separate issue from what we are engaged in this particular series of Senate hearings. And that is lawlessness and riots and looting, the destruction of private property and public property, in my mind, has nothing whatsoever to do with Mr. Floyd's death. What you witnessed after his death was pure and simple criminal activity. And I have absolutely no problem in separating the two in my mind, because they are in fact separate and distinct issues that we have to grapple with. Without question, there will be, at some point, there's going to be some hearings into the police reform that people really do want to talk about. I get it. But right now, just keep in mind that there is an investigation ongoing by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. Senators Klobuchar and Smith have requested a DOJ system and pattern investigation, as have I and Senator Senjum and Senator Engelbretson. And I think that once we begin getting answers from those investigations, that's the time to take up the question of police reform, because we really don't know what reforms are necessary at this point. I think we recognize reforms are needed, but what are those reforms? And I think that we only should be taking that up after we have had those investigations completed. So in my mind, Shannon, two absolutely clearly distinct questions.
And so just to follow up on that a little bit, I mean, blame will be assigned at some point in the future on the initial response, you know, the civil unrest, you know, how much was police response? How much is the police union responsible, the city council, the mayor's office? So that's on one side. But in general, beyond that, what kinds of changes can the legislature itself enact to dissuade social unrest and these kinds of events from happening in the future?
Well, to begin with, I would say that one of the core functions of government is public safety, and that is the Minnesota legislature. So right out of the gate, we do have in the Senate and in the House, we do have an interest in what occurred and why. Can the legislature pass laws which dictate the behavior of people? I don't think so. So I think you have to draw a line between what's criminal activity and what is legitimate social disobedience, you know, the right to protest. There, in my mind, it's just a huge difference. And I don't know that we need to engage in the constitutional right to protest. People have a right to do that. But we do have a right to engage in looking at laws which will address criminal activity. And the criminal activity here, I mean, just think about what happened. The destruction of people's lives, you know, their livelihood, I mean, their businesses, the looting that went on, it was just, to me, it was just mind-boggling. So all of that criminal activity, yeah, this legislature has an absolute responsibility to look at it and enact whatever laws. We think we need laws that are stiffer in terms of punishment, then I think that we ought to be looking at that. Because I think that without a doubt, there were people coming into the Twin Cities from outstate and out of the state to participate in criminal activity. And that is a far, far cry from the civil protests people have a right to do.
Senator Scott Newman, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, Shannon.
Senator Patricia Torres Ray is a member of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus. I spoke with her about what her district needs and the changes she'd like to see.
You represent the area of Minneapolis that was heavily impacted by the looting that occurred following the death of George Floyd. What are you hearing from your constituents and what do they need?
I'm hearing two things. One is that they really want us to address systemic issues and address police reform. The issue around criminal justice reform really is a top priority for my district. But they also want us to work in reconstruction and really looking at what is that we need to do in order to rebuild our communities, rebuild our businesses, provide the necessary resources to create an economy that works for all of us. Because the civil unrest was the result of an economy that didn't work for a vast group of people. So I think that my district is very clear on those two issues, and they want us to pay very close attention to the future in terms of providing, you know, the safety nets that are necessary, not just in terms of, you know, security and safety, but also prosperity for all communities, and looking at how do we prevent gentrification, you know, the expansion of large businesses that are not owned by people from the community. And so those are really the two most important messages that my constituents are trying to deliver to the legislature and to the community in general.
So you recently spoke before a joint meeting of the Transportation Committee and the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee. They are looking into the lawlessness that followed George Floyd's death. You read a list of names of people who've been arrested for looting and for arson, and that list, the people represented on that list are not from the Twin Cities. They're from Greater Minnesota and even from out of state. Is there any way to prevent those opportunists, essentially, who are coming in to the area of civil unrest and creating more chaos. Is there any way to prevent that from happening in the future?
Absolutely. I think I talk about this issue really early during this crisis, that I noticed that some of the people that came to the city were people that I didn't recognize. And the reason I was able to do that is because I have worked with activists very, very closely. They come to my office, I know their names, I know their faces, we recognize each other in the streets. I don't believe that that is the case for an overwhelming majority of elected officials. They don't know who our activists are. They don't know about their work. So it's difficult to think in terms of how do we protect activists? How do we protect this very important process that really strengthens this incredible democracy and this wonderful country that we live in if we don't know who they are? If we don't know, what they are trying to propose, if we don't have a relationship with them. So I think that is the first and most important step, that we need to develop those relationships. Then we're able to recognize, who's doing the real work. How do we respond? How do we have meaningful interactions, meaningful connections, and hear their message? The reason these happen in the streets at the level that it happened is because we have not been able to have meaningful interactions with activists, get to know each other, get to work together. And so therefore, they get to the streets to demand this attention, to demand this conversation, and then we don't recognize, who is there, who isn't, what are we trying to do? We really need to do a better job of connecting with our activists, meaningfully developing relationships so that we can do policy, because that's the job of the activist, actually, is to influence our decision-making process. And we should be welcoming, the activists. We should be really listening, and we can prevent all of this if we did that. It's just that simple in my view.
I think George Floyd's death prompted many of us to take a closer look at systemic racism in Minnesota. And there may be misunderstandings about the differences between interpersonal racism, one person behaving badly, and the structure of systemic racism, which is much broader. How would you describe the systemic racism faced by people of color and Indigenous people?
I believe that these two issues are connected. You cannot have a system functioning with people who make decisions, with people who act every day, whose job is to protect people, to interact with people, to make decisions, and then have a system that is in a vacuum outside of these, this direction or this personal management, let's call it that way, right? So that they go together. And so I believe that it is very important that we understand that systems are managed by people. People make these systems happen, behave, interact, and therefore they are connected. What has happened, I think, over the years in this country is that we have taken for granted that some changes and some systemic, protections were in place for everyone, and we assume that everybody benefit from those systemic protections. And what we find in Minnesota is that those systemic protections, services, and benefits are really not available to an overwhelming number of people of color and Indigenous people. So we have to work in our own personal attitudes and understanding of what that is so that we can do our jobs and really improve the systems that were put in place to protect everyone in the state of Minnesota. So I hope that we are able to understand that, and we're able to really reflect on the fact that Minnesota has had some of the deepest disparities in this country. And for as long as I've been in this country, which is now 33 years, we've been talking about it, and we have made very little progress to really change that.
So then, are you optimistic that this tragic incident may be a catalyst for significant change, and what might that change look like?
I am optimistic. I am optimistic because I see a lot of engagement from young communities, from our youth, and that gives me tremendous optimism. I am a parent of a 22 and a 24-year-old, and when I hear them talk about their friends and how diverse their communities are and the level of engagement and knowledge about what is going on in this country, and their fearless attitude towards change and really working on this, I get a lot of hope. And I just feel that it is that energy, that connectivity that exists in our youth that is going to take us really to the change that we need right now, because I don't believe that we have done really the job that we needed to do as a generation. You know, for some of us who, I'm in my 50s, people know that, you know, we were kind of taught to be more obedient and say, well, you know, this cannot be done, so move along. And I think this generation is just not accepting that and saying, you know what, we're not going to move along, because these disparities have gone so far that they're not just impacting those very communities, they're impacting all of us. And so it's time for change, and they are, you know, they are ready. They are ready, and I am very hopeful, very optimistic that they are going to help us move into this society that builds the equity that we need for everyone.
Senator Patricia Torres Ray, thank you.
Thank you so much.
The coronavirus pandemic has impacted all sectors of society, including disability service providers. I spoke with the chair of the Human Services Reform Committee, Senator Jim Abeler.
Many disability service providers are now on the verge of collapse due to COVID-19. What do these businesses provide, and who do they serve?
Well, they're really important, and there's hundreds, maybe 1,000 of them that we're worried about. They provide services for people, day services for jobs, some of the workshops they can go to if they can't work in a regular place around town. They support the employment. They provide autism services, treatments for all kinds of mental illness challenges, rides around town, and they're on the verge of collapse. They haven't had any business really since March. They were shut down with the stay-at-home order and essential services and all. And so most of the workers who were there, people with disabilities, actually stayed home. And so no revenue got generated. Yet the places have like overhead of 50%. And so they're at grave risk of closing, which would be just catastrophic.
In the last special session, the Senate unanimously passed a rescue package that would have provided $30 million in grants to help these businesses stay afloat. As I understand it, the measure was not taken up in the House. Why is that?
Well, the good news is that the Senate agreed on something really hard. This is a very hard topic. What do you do? Who do you choose to rescue? So many businesses are in trouble. These places are particularly crucial because they provide Medicaid benefits to people who really need them. They're not casual services, they're core, basic, really important services. And if they go away, really bad things will happen. The individuals won't have someplace to go. Some could even actually die if it comes to that. And thanks to many of our friends across the aisle, Senator Hoffman, Senator Isaacson as Democrats, Senator Kiffmeyer and me, particularly on our side of the aisle, Senator Coran, found a way to actually have the Senate agree on something, 67-0. This is not one of those name a street after somebody. This is a really hard topic, and I don't know why the House didn't take it up. I know the department has been somewhat slow to find this a great concern, but I think they're warming up to it. But it's a great, great concern, and hopefully we'll have better luck coming this session if the governor just doesn't do an executive order and get it taken care of.
Okay, so lay it out for us. What will happen if a significant number of these disability service providers don't survive the pandemic?
Well, people won't be able to have rides to the doctor. In Greater Minnesota, special transportation is really important for how people can get around. The people won't have services out of their group homes. They'll be stuck in their group home, looking at the walls all day. They won't socialize. And you know, with the nursing home thing, some of the lack of socialization has actually been blamed for people dying. And they need something to live for. And so Minnesota has made a great effort to have people be as independent as they can be, even more coming. That's a different show. But we're kind of proud of what we have, and it's not that great, but it would be way worse if a third of the places collapsed, which is really the size we're talking about. Hundreds and hundreds of companies, maybe 100,000 people are served by them at this point. And especially in Greater Minnesota, there just isn't any redundancy of services. So it'd be really bad And then there'd be lawsuits because we have to provide these services. And frankly, the amount of money we're talking about is probably less than we'd lose on the lawsuits. Never mind the humanity and the importance of each person being a special human being.
In the meantime, we are still in the midst of this pandemic, and Minnesotans with disabilities thrive on personal contact and interactivity. As you said, it's part of what brightens their day and gives them a will to live, you know, interacting with people. But it's not safe right now. So, and then of course, congregate care settings, those people are even more at risk of COVID-19. Are there alternatives right now? Is DHS coming up with alternatives for when people can't be together that maybe could help some of these businesses survive?
Well, and kudos to Commissioner Harpstead and her crew as they have found, I think, 80 different flexibilities they've come up with that the Senate was instrumental in helping them get laid out. The structure of it, the governor put it into an executive order, much as we're hoping he'll put this language into an executive action so the money could go out. But so there's some flexibility, but still it's like a kiss through a screen door. It's one thing to, well, talk to you on the Zoom meeting, but it's nothing at all like being in person and seeing the inflections of, you know, how you're nodding or winking or your eyes. I mean, it's just all this, so much of the message is nonverbal, and we lose almost all that on Zoom. And so then you get to talk to somebody on Zoom. It's like watching TV or something. It's nothing the same, nothing at all the same.
It's likely that a special session is around the corner. Are you working with your counterparts in the House to maybe get some of this legislation through in the next special session? Or you've mentioned that Governor Walz could do this by executive order. Have you interacted with him in any way? Like, is this rising now to the top of the heap as something that should get done?
I hope it's on everybody's to-do list. And the governor finally did call me, frankly, after 13 outreaches, to talk about this and other things I wish we could have talked about, but talking about this, and he asserted that this is very important to him and that it's something we need to look after. And so I'm encouraging him today just to do an executive action and put the $30 million out there. It actually costs $13 million a month, so that'd be a really good start. And then come session, we're working on jacketing a bill, and Hunter Cantrell, Representative Cantrell, and Zach Stevenson have been very helpful. And we're in communication with the chairs there, and lots of people are very worried about this. I think there's a lot of discussion and just a will to get it done. This is one of those things, when you look at it, it's like, let's get this done. This is just a no-brainer. A contentious Senate agreed 67-0 on a hard topic. And so Governor, Department of Human Services, House, let's just do the right thing and help these people enjoy the life that we are so proud to offer them. Because everybody matters in Minnesota, and in particular the people that we're trying to make their lives special. So pray it works.
Senator Jim Abeler, thank you.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.